All right, I think it's 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our weekly tours. A couple of guidelines before we begin. We just ask that if you're in our Zoom room, you keep yourself muted. So you're already muted, your microphone's off, but you can just keep it that way for the duration of the tour. If you have any questions or comments during the tour, we absolutely welcome those, and we hope that you do have questions and comments. We just ask that you put them in the chat. So that's the speech bubble with the word chat at the bottom of your screen. You can type all of your comments, questions, whatever comes up, and we'll do a Q&A at the end, so we'll get all those questions answered. If you're joining us on Facebook, welcome to you as well. And the same thing applies to you. You can put all of your questions and comments in the comment section below the video, and we're monitoring that so we can bring you in at the end as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our docent for the day, Eleanor Merle, one of our seasoned veterans at this point in our virtual tour world. We're so happy to have her with us. And today she will be presenting the highlights of the Timken Museum. So you can take it away, Eleanor.
Thank you, Allison. Well, good morning, everyone, and greetings and welcome. As Allison said, my name is Eleanor Merle. I'm a docent with the museum. And today we'll be touring 5 galleries, including a distinguished group of Russian icons. And each work tells a fascinating story reflecting the social, historical, and cultural context in which it was created. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Timken Museum, briefly, it owes its existence to the generosity of 2 families, Anne and Amy Putnam, who dedicated their lives to collecting art, and the Timken family, who funded the building of the museum, which opened in October 1965 as the only museum in Balboa Park, which is free at all times. So I'd like to begin with the Russian Icon Gallery, and this was of special interest to Amy Putnam, who studied the Russian language at Stanford. And the source of most of these icons date from the Russian Revolution, when the images were taken off the walls and dispersed internationally. And Amy and Ann Putnam gathered a large collection of them. So we're very fortunate to have this collection. Now, the works in this gallery are called icons, and they're sacred images. They are the prevalent art form within the Russian and Greek Orthodox Church. Through these icons, religious stories and teachings are disseminated to the faithful to reinforce the Christian doctrine. So when you enter a Russian Orthodox church, you're going to see a screen or a wall of icons which spreads across the nave and goes up to be 5 stories high. And this screen separates the nave from the sanctuary. And the name of the screen is that it's an iconostasis. Now, it might seem like it creates a barrier, but this isn't the case. Rather, it symbolizes the boundary between the divine and human worlds. It creates a window through which the faithful glimpse the sacred world beyond. And if you can see here, these are the royal gates through which the clergy pass. And just to the left of the royal gates is an icon of Mary and the Christ child. And this image is called the Georgian Mother of God. So let's take a look at the Timken's version of the Georgian Mother of God. The Virgin is always known in an icon context as the Mother of God. And in this image, she's depicted in the traditional pose of the Hatagetria. And this is Greek for pointer of the way or guide. So she gestures with her right hand to the Christ child as being the way, the truth, and the life, the source of salvation for humankind. Now, tradition considers the icon to have been divinely revealed. In other words, it was miraculously created. And as such, the authenticity of an icon depends on its resemblance to the earliest divinely inspired images. So these are spiritual images. Creativity in creating an icon is not really part of the vocabulary. Now let's take a look at Mary's facial features. And you will note that she's got large almond-shaped eyes looking both at the Christ child and up to the heavens, perhaps knowingly seeing what is portended for the Christ child. She's got a closed mouth because you do not speak in the presence of God, large ears to hear the word of God, and elongated fingers, which are, reaching out the right hand to the Christ child. Now, notice on her cape or her maphorium that there are 3 stars, and these are called the Stella Maris. And these represent Mary's virginity before, during, and after the nativity. And whenever you see an image of a female saint and she's wearing her maphorium with these stars, you know that it's Mary. This is her attribute. This is the image by which you know that this is Mary. Now, the Christ child holds a sprig of wheat symbolizing the body of Christ, immortality, and resurrection. So we're now, well, actually, one thing I did want to mention to you is if you can see in the image what look like small pinpricks, and these held a metal covering called an oclad or a reza. And this metal covering was used to cover all of the image except the face and the faces and the hands. And this was to secure the image against touching and smoke and, destroying of the image. So that's what an oclad is, and that's what those pinpricks are. Now, we're going to move from the Byzantine art of the East to, which are very stylized portraits of religious figures, and take a look at a portrait from the Renaissance period in our Italian gallery. And this intriguing young woman from the 16th century Venice is by Bartolomeo Veneto. And the reason we know this is Bartolomeo is that this little curly piece of paper, what looks like a piece of paper called a cartellino, it's almost like a trump lawyer, jumps off the page, says when it was made, June through September of 1530, and that it was done by Bartolomeo Veneto. That's the only reason we know it's him. It was only really in the 19th century that paintings began to be identified and attributed to Bartolomeo Veneto. Now, after many centuries in which generic representation had been the norm, distinctive portrait likenesses began to appear in 15th century Europe. And this reflected a manifestation of the Renaissance humanism with its emphasis on the individual and their place in the world. Now, if you look at this young lady, I think you'll agree, she is dressed in the height of fashion. Bartolomeo Veneto was very well known for his presentation of costumes and the lushness of how he painted them. Here she's wearing the height of fashion. She has a dress of green silk, a gold blouse called a fichu with embroidery, a violet belt, lapis beads, and look at these very large puffy sleeves. These are detachable. Since, they did not have laundromats in those days, having detachable sleeves, which could be washed, was really a very useful thing to do. And you'll notice that pulled through slits in her sleeves are portions of her underdress. And she does that to show that she is wealthy enough to have underclothes that she can pull through the sleeves of her dress. Notice also her brown leather gloves. They're kind of strange because they're rather heavy, and she's wearing one on her right hand. Now, one might surmise that this is a falconer's glove for hawking or falconry, and that she might be left-handed, because if it is a falconry glove, it would normally be on the individual's left hand, but it's on her right hand, so she may be left-handed. She also has a very elaborate headdress, or a scoufia, which is made up of hair and gold and blue ribbon. This elaborate headdress is called the scoufia, and she has Titian ginger red hair. She probably dyed her hair henna, which was quite in vogue at this time in the 16th century. So look at her expression. Now, again, remember, we're into the early 16th century, and the inner workings, the psychology of the sitter came to be displayed for the first time in their portraits. And I'm not sure how you would describe how she's looking, but she kind of has a piercing, very wary, a petulant kind of image. And she's, her head is tilted, and she's looking at you, kind of her eyes pulled to the right, and she's looking at you. Now, for many centuries, we did not know who this young lady was. But in the 1980s, a UCSD student, candidate for graduation, offered evidence that this young lady was Maria Paleologo, and that she was engaged to be married to the son of Isabella d'Este, the Marquez. She was a Marquesa. And take a look at this image by Titian, done at about the same time, and you'll notice she's wearing the same scoufia, and this was the link. And what we know is that Isabella d'Este gave to anyone joining the family, and in this case, this woman, Maria Paleologo, was going to marry Isabella d'Este's son, Federico Gonzaga II. So she gave her the scoufia. Now, unfortunately, just really the month before the wedding, Maria Paleologo was poisoned. A coincidence or not, we really don't know. But the scoufia did not go in vain, because her sister married Federico Gonzaga II. So it all stayed in the family. So that's the story of the lady in the green dress. We'll now leave the Renaissance period, and we'll look at a work about 100 years later, painted during the Baroque period. And this is a work which tells a story, a biblical parable. It's taken from the New Testament Gospel according to Luke, and it's the parable of the prodigal son. This work was created in 1654 by the northern Italian artist Giovanni Francesco Barbieri. He was more well known as Il Guercino, or the Squinter. And he did 7 versions of this work. Here is a much earlier version from 1619. He started doing the versions in 1617. And you'll notice the coloring is quite different. The dress of the 3 figures is different. The composition, it's all quite different. Our version is the last one. This one was commissioned by the Archbishop of Bologna. Many of you, I'm sure, know the story of the prodigal son. Very briefly, the younger son of a wealthy man wanted his inheritance, and the father gave the inheritance to him, and the son went off and he squandered it on wine, women, and song. And he came back, he was feeding pigs as a job, and he realized that he'd be in a better shape if he was back with his father. So he came back very repentantly to his father. And in this moment in the story, we have the prodigal son saying, "Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your name, I do not deserve to be your son." And the father is bringing his arm around the son, and is forgiving him and saying, I thought you were dead and now you're alive, thought you were lost and now you're found. Let's kill the fatted calf and have a celebration. So this is probably the best known story of redemption and forgiveness. And you may not see it that clearly in the painting, but you'll see drops of tears showing the repentance of the prodigal son. This is the only version where the son and the father are grasping their hands like this. You have a dramatic use of color, which was quite characteristic of the Baroque period, colors in the clothing that they're wearing and in the turban. Now, let's put this work in context. In context for a moment. This work was done during the whoops. I apologize for the phone. This work was done during the 17th century, in which the Catholic Church, as part of the Counter-Reformation efforts, was using Baroque art as a means of calling back their faithful who had left as a result of the Protestant Reformation. And so you see the servant who is here, and the servant is looking directly at the audience. He's not looking at the other members. And he might be saying to the audience, we welcome you back to the Catholic Church. You don't need to be with the Protestant Church. You know, all is forgiven. So this is a counter-Reformation work. Many of the church commissioned works in the 17th century were in the interests of the efforts to bring back the faithful to the Catholic Church. Now, before leaving the Italian and Spanish gallery, let's stop briefly at a work by the Spanish artist Zurbarán, known as Saint Francis in Meditation, from 1635. Zurbarán was one of the greatest Spanish painters, and he received commissions primarily from religious orders. Saint Francis, as you may know, was a mystic, a poet, and a founder of the Franciscans order. But note, he's wearing a hat of the Capuchin order. Think of Capuchin monkeys. He's wearing a hat of that order, and it may be that a Capuchin individual commissioned this work. Zurbarán did 34 versions of Saint Francis, and in this one he is deep in prayer, and his face is illuminated from the left, and he is looking at a skull. Now, a skull in this context is referred to as a memento mori, or remembrance of death. And keep this in mind as we leave the Spanish and Italian gallery and we enter the Dutch and Flemish gallery, and we're going to look at a still life by Pieter Clèze. Pieter Clèze was the foremost still life painter in Haarlem, which was the leading center of artistic life in 17th century Holland. Now, the Dutch invented the still life, and you can thank the Protestant Reformation with its emphasis on the individual's direct relationship with God, which you can thank it because it led to the decline in ecclesiastical patronage for large-scale religious works. Rather, there developed a new group of customers for a new type of art. And this was the Dutch Protestant middle class. And they loved to buy art for their homes. Many of them would have 10, 15 pictures in their homes. Now, Clèze specialized in what were called these breakfast pieces. And they show you, or Aunt Beach, and they show you the ingredients from an ordinary informal meal. So what you see here is a pitcher. It is turned over, a beaker half filled with beer, a brazier with charcoal, which is burning, and herring, two herring on a plate, which is kind of almost tipping over the ledge of the table. We don't really know where in the meal the sitter would be. You know, did he have to get up? Was he interrupted in the meal? We don't really know. So there's a bit of an unsettling nature to this piece. But I want you to take a look at another work which was done about 30 years later, also by by Klaus, and it is called, we know it as a vanitas painting. It's ripe with symbolic objects which are intended to emphasize the transience of life, the futility of earthly pleasure, and the certainty of death. So very obviously you have a skull, you have bones, you have a candle, you know, which is extinguished, and all of these speak to the transience of life and the certainty of death. And this kind of work is called the vanitas work. So if we go back to our work, you might call it vanitas light. You could interpret it a bit as a vanitas work. The jug is turned over, half the glass, you know, is full, the charcoal is burning out. But this was a lighter, you know, version. And it, you know, it really didn't speak to the vanitas painting the way that many of Klaus's other works did. Now, in addition to the still life, the Dutch invented a landscape, and Pieter Bruegel is considered one of the greatest Flemish painters, and he was the master of the landscape. And here we have the parable of the sower. More than any other painter, Bruegel freed landscape from its dependence on religion. Now, if you notice, you've got quite a few mountains here. Bruegel had recently returned to Antwerp 2 years ago, and this scenery is evocative of his trip to Italy, because the Netherlands, of course, is quite flat. And you have the biblical parable being, you have the biblical parable being played out. Give me one moment, please. I'm sorry. You have the biblical parable being played out in this front area here, where you have the sower who is sowing his seeds. And some of those seeds are going to fall on barren ground and they won't grow. Some are going to fall on stony ground or thorny ground, and they are not going to be fruitful. Some of them will fall on the fertile earth, and they will be fruitful and they will grow. Well, you have a common story being played on the other side of the river, where you have a group of people listening to Jesus Christ. And some of them will not hear the words of Jesus Christ, but other of them will, and they will be fruitful and, you know, will have eternal life. So this is the parable, you know, this is the parable of the sower. We're now going to lighten up our tone a little bit and take a look at a work by Francois Boucher. And I'm going to ask you to bear with me one moment. Bear with me one moment. Yes, I'm sorry. So here we are at Lovers in the Park, and works such as these were intended to decorate the interiors of grand salons. And they're a display of nonchalant, whimsy, carefree demeanor, and they reflect the lighter Rococo style, which lasted for a relatively short time, only from about 1720 to 1780, but it's a very light, frivolous, joyous period in art in France. Now, why did the Rococo style come to pass at this time? Well, in 1715, King Louis XIV, who was a control freak, and he mandated the aristocracy stay with him in Versailles, he died, and his great-grandson, Louis XV, who was just a boy, took over the throne, and the aristocrats were able to go back to their homes in relief, and they were able to decorate the salons of their grand mansions. And so we see here a painting which depicts an aristocratic couple and their spaniel seated in an overgrown garden, resting under a pair of Amorini angels who playfully mimic their position. The young man is picking flowers from his lover's hat, and he's weaving them into her hair. And the shepherdess girl kind of just shows up on the scene. If you look at her feet, it looks like, she's just landed there coming from nowhere. But the young man, of course, is flirting with her, while his lover aimlessly looks out with either a blank stare or resignation. Now, not coincidentally, the spaniel in this case typically represents fidelity, exactly what we don't have in the young gentleman's flirtation. Now, this picture really is true for the period, because during the 18th century, it was fashionable for the aristocracy to escape from the strict etiquette of the French court, and they would go to their secluded rustic retreats, and they would live there as though they were simple country people, and they dressed up in these elaborate versions of peasant clothing, and they strolled the gardens. So the milkmaids, garments are very much the kind of idealized peasant garbs that was sported, for fun by the royal and aristocratic ladies of the time. Francois Boucher was born in 1703, and he was perhaps the most celebrated painter and decorative artist of 18th century France. He was a great favorite of the court, and he did many paintings for members of the French aristocracy, notably King Louis XV and his mistress, Madame de Pompadour. But paintings were not all that Boucher did. He designed tapestries, both for the royal workshops at Beauvais, and then he was director of the Royal Gobelin workshops. He also created designs for the Sèvres porcelain factory, and his works explored, glorious, playful themes of young lovers and lush gardens, lavish bedrooms, flirting, playing games, all kinds of pursuits of the eternal game of love. The French philosopher Denis Diderot criticized Boucher, or his only criticism of Boucher was to say, and I quote, "That man is capable of everything except the truth." So here is an image of a soup tureen, and you see at the bottom an image of a Boucher image. So take a look at the bottoms of take a look at your tea sets and the bottoms of your, of your tureens, and you may see a Boucher image. Now, by the 1780s, there was a move away from the Rococo frivolity to more severe neoclassical period, more in sync with the moral climate of the final years of the French monarchy. And Jacques-Louis David, who was considered the preeminent neoclassical painter of his day, was best known for his huge history paintings, which were characterized by themes and styles from ancient Greece and Rome. And here's one of his best known works, The Oath of the Hierarchy. But Timken, but he also did portraits, and he's considered the first great portrait painter of the 19th century. And we're thrilled to have this portrait of an Irish timber merchant, Cooper Penrose. Now, Cooper Penrose was a Quaker, and he knew of Jacques-Louis David, and he traveled to Paris in 1802 to commission this work. Now, he was a Quaker, but he loved to collect art and antiques, and his home was filled with them. His home was known as the Irish Vatican. And, he wasn't expelled from the Quaker faith, but he came awfully close. And what you see in this image is a small man. He is 66 years old, and he's sitting rather stiffly in a neoclassical armchair. He's dressed very simply, no ring, no scarf pin to sound a showy note, but elegant. But perhaps he was trying to show deference to his Quaker heritage here by having a very low key composition where he is low in the composition. Now our attention is drawn to the brilliantly painted head and hands of Cooper Penrose. Here David reveals Penrose's complex personality. The silver white wings of hair at his ears may suggest a restrained flair for personal style. The ruddy cheeks, a robust delight in life. The eyes, crowned by strong arched eyebrows, a lively glint of shrewdness. Even Penrose's mouth has a quizzical tilt, kind of like the Mona Lisa's. The animated hands offer the final clue to his character. One is hanging down, vain and elegant, and the other, with fingers touching, are ready to hold a manuscript, a pair of reading glasses, or engage in conversation. I do want you to recall that David was not just a painter. He was a very active participant in the French Revolution. He was in jail for 2 years, 1774 to 75. And upon release from prison, he aligned himself with Napoleon and received the highest Medal of Honor in 1803. Let's now move on to the American Gallery and admire a portrait of an elegant colonial lady who is shrouded in mystery. The year is 1771, New York City, and the sitter is Margaret Kemble Gage, and she's the wife of General Thomas Gage. The painter is John Singleton Copley, who by age 20, quite young, was colonial Boston's most influential portrait painter, and he was largely self-taught. He came to New York City to paint the A-listers. He came on the invitation of Margaret Kemble's brother, and he had commissions that were already committed to. Now, Copley was known for his quick study of his sitters. He was a constant observer of people, fashions, and trends. He loved to dress fashionably. He felt that would help his business, and he was probably correct. And his success is rooted in his ability to appeal to his sitters' desire to be portrayed on a par with their English counterparts. Remember, this is still before the Revolution. And the rage at all this time was Turkery, to be dressed in the mode of the Turkish Empire. So we see here a 3/4 length portrait, a relaxed, serene, confident woman who is seated quite languidly on a dark blue velvet sofa, which probably was Copley. Copley had props that he brought, with him in his studio. She's on this sofa, her curved right arm and hand are supporting her head, and she's depicted wearing an uncorseted, iridescent rose silk kaftan, which is loosely closed over a cream lace-trimmed chemise. She's got a deep red jewel at her bosom and an embroidered dark blue belt and at her waist, which is mirrored in the fabric of her turban. Around her neck are 2 strands of delicate miniature pearls. She has larger pearls wrapped around her left elbow and entwined in her Turkish-style headscarf. The tasseled scarf is embroidered, as I said, in the same blue as her belt. Her long hair is piled high on her head, falling over her right shoulder. Now, Copley was very pleased with this portrait. He said, and I quote, "It is, I think, beyond compare, the best lady's portrait I ever drew." In 1774, Copley finally took his long-awaited grand tour of Europe, and he never returned home. But we are left with Mrs. Gage and an unsolved mystery as to whether she was a colonial informant. She was a third generation American. And here we have her husband. This portrait was done by Copley, also done in 1768, 3 years before her portrait, and shows him as a very affable fellow in his uniform. And he knew of a plan to attack the colonists in Lexington and Concord. And in Lexington and Concord. And somehow word of that got to the colonials, and the mission fell apart. There was no, the British did not, their plans did not go as expected. And the question becomes, who told the colonists, the patriots? Was it Mrs. Gage? Well, we don't really know, but we do know that she was scurried off to England with her 10 children, and her husband, General Gage, came shortly thereafter. They had another child together, so I guess they were still speaking, they were still speaking to one another. We're now ready for our final painting, a work by Eastman Johnson. In 1880, when Eastman Johnson completed arguably his greatest painting, Cranberry Harvest, Island of Nantucket, he was already one of the best known American artists. He was born in Lovell, Maine in 1824. And by 1845, he had already done many portraits of well-known individuals, and he'd done genre scenes of the South during the Civil War. In 1869, searching for aspects of rural life as subjects for ambitious paintings, the 45-year-old painter, who was married for the first time, visited Nantucket, and he returned annually over the next decade until he finally realized his goal of creating this wonderful, perhaps greatest of his paintings. He wrote to a friend, and I quote, "I was taken with my cranberry fit as soon as I arrived. Some people have rose fever yearly. I have cranberry fever. As they began picking in the meadow a day or two after we arrived, I've done nothing else since I've been here, not a thing." He did 17 oil paintings and 1 watercolor and drawing in preparation for this work. And here are some of those preliminary drawings. He really was building up his imagery of the people, because there are over 40 individuals in this work. Notice the looseness of the brushstroke, kind of a forerunner to American Impressionism, and some even call him the first Impressionist. Now, what captures your attention first is the central figure, this woman standing, and she is looking at a young boy who is holding, presumably, her son. And at the far left are children in conversation. In the center is a man sitting on a chair picking the cranberries. And on the right are children who are loading the cranberries into the wagon. Now notice that there's a windmill in the distance. Now the windmill doesn't really appear in that spot, but Johnson wanted to put it there so people would recognize this as Nantucket Island. Now, it's a telling measure of this work's importance to Johnson that he never attempted a work even remotely like it after this point. He rather returned to New York, and he did portraits for the rest of his career. Well, our tour has now come to a close. I know it's been quite a whirlwind run through our galleries, and I hope you enjoyed hearing the stories our masterworks have to tell. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you so much. I love, you have so many fun facts. I always notice that, and there's always a new one that I hear. Like this time, I know that it was Margaret Kemble's sister, was it, or brother, that brought Copley to
The brother. Yeah, the brother.
Wow, that's such a funny connection. Yeah, I did not know that.
He planned to stay for 3 months. He stayed for 6. He did about 37 portraits during that time, period. Many of them were of children, actually.
Oh, okay. Huh. Wow. Yeah. So then he ended up kind of painting someone that he knew very well, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, we can have a couple minutes now, for Q&A. So does anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. We're checking on Facebook too. So if there's any there in the comments, you can put them in the comments on Facebook too. Or you can just unmute yourself if you're in our Zoom room.
I have a question. Hi, everyone. This
Great.
is Ella. Yes, I just joined and I didn't realize that it's about 20, but at least I got a glimpse of a couple paintings. But I have seen the cranberry pickers in a different museum. Did Johnson paint different versions of these paintings or variations of it?
Well, his finished work was only this one. I think he did one other that was like this one. He did all the, 17 preliminary drawings, but I don't think he did different. I'm not aware of different versions
we were
of
putting
this one.
The PowerPoint together, I think I remember seeing that some of those sketches are in museums now, and they're on view. So maybe it was sketches.
That's what it seemed like when I saw this. Wow, everything is in focus. The other one that I saw earlier, and I forget the museum, it was like everything was blurry. You're wondering what the faces look like, but here everything was crystal clear.
Yeah, exactly. So you saw the first version, and now you see
probably.
the second version.
So interesting, fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to let you know that these are recorded on our Facebook page. So if you go to the Timken Museum's Facebook page, you can watch the whole thing, or you can join next week, of course. But yeah, glad you enjoyed it for a few minutes.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Anyone else have any comments or questions? Doesn't have to be a question. You can just, any thoughts about the tour? Checking our chat too. Nope. All right. Well, you must have done a comprehensive job then, Eleanor. Oh, thank you, Ken. Ken says, excellent tour. I learned a lot. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
comment. Thank you, everyone. And we certainly look forward to folks seeing these in person. It's wonderful doing the virtual tours. It will be even more wonderful when we get back to the museum.
Eleanor, I did want to ask, while we have you, do you want to give a little plug for your lecture series that's coming up?
Oh, yeah. I will be doing a 3 lecture series on portraits over 3 generations. So it'll be the 16th century with Bartolomeo Veneto. It'll be the 17th century with Anthony Van Dyck, and the 18th century with John Singleton Copley. And that's coming up. I'm not going to say the dates. It is on our calendar on the websites, 3 consecutive, I'm not sure what day, Tuesdays perhaps in June, but it's 3 consecutive dates in June. It will follow the series of 3 lectures by Florence Gilman. Not the same, date.
Yeah, so we have 2 by her. I think the first 2 weeks of June that are finishing up her series is beginning in April. And she's looking at religious figures in our collection and kind of delving into their stories. And then after that, Eleanor's will start. And as she said, it's focused on portraiture and kind of really, again, doing like a deep dive on some of the artists in our collection and their portraiture and kind of how portraiture developed in Europe, over these centuries.
During that time.
Really excited for that one. Until then, we do these tours every week. So every Thursday at 11 a.m. you can join in. And I know that next week we are looking at kind of comparisons. So we're looking at mentors and mentees in our artists in our collection. So kind of who are they inspired by and who did they inspire? So I'm really excited for that one. It'll be a week from today, Thursday at 11 a.m. So we hope that you tune in or that you come to our lecture series or both. And all of our information can always be found on our website, timkenmuseum.org, under the events tab, or our Facebook page. You can just search Timken Museum of Art under the events tab there. So thank you again for joining us and hope to see you next time.
Thank you.